Jean-Pierre Cabestan.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you to the organizer, to Thierry de Montbrial and AFRI for inviting me to this new edition of the World Policy Conference. Two things regarding these, the title, coming back to the title of this panel, Economic Growth and Geopolitical Challenges. I think economic growth in the coming years will depend on a number of major economies in the region. First of all, the Chinese economy. And it will depend upon the stimulus package, which is going to be put forward by the Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party. We don't know yet whether consumption is going to be really stimulated, because there are more and more trade barriers around China, which will have an impact on the trade flows. As you know, China's growth model is still driven by exports rather than by domestic consumptions, and the adaptation of the Chinese economy is something which will take some time anyway, and for the time being, the stimulus package has been much more aimed at overhauling local finance than really stimulating consumption. So now the good news is that I think in the region itself, we don't see much decoupling, we see more de-risking. Of course, China has tried actually embark into a project of autonomization of its own economy with the Made in China 2025 in terms of high technologies. But at the same time, and we see at the same time some other countries in the region, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, also trying to decrease their dependence upon China. But having said that, I think economic integration continues to develop. You see, for a number of years, ASEAN and China and ASEAN having more trade than China and the European Union now. So we have this regionalization of economic realization, which is also continuing to deepen. And if you look at Taiwan, as which was already mentioned by Doug. There are limits to the new southbound policy that Taiwan has tried to develop in order to reduce its dependence on China. So in the coming year, that's going to be a big part of the equation between Taiwan and China. Taiwan will remain highly dependent upon the Chinese market. So that's another interesting development. Now, the final example I would give in terms of economic integration is Vietnam, which has kind of adopted a very balanced policy between China on the one hand and the United States, importing a lot from China but exporting a lot to the United States, to the point that now the US has become its first export destination ahead of any other country. So, moving to the other issue, which is geopolitical challenges, actually Vietnam has managed to stabilize its relationship with China on the issue of the South China Sea. As you know, Vietnam claims the paracels, has a number of outposts in the Spratly Islands, and despite conflicting maritime and territorial claims with China, in the last few years, there hasn't been any major friction between China and Vietnam, which is quite a big contrast with the frictions which you have accumulated between the Philippines and China in the South China Sea, particularly in the South China Sea, in the Spratly area around some shoals called the Second Thomas Shoal, where in the last few years tensions have flared up quite a lot. Now, the good news about the South China Sea, since we have moved to geopolitical tensions, is that there is a willingness on both sides, both Beijing and Manila, not to escalate too much. Now, the decision, for instance, made by the Marcos junior administration not to send warships to the disputed areas, but to keep posting and deploying Coast Guards, so Whitehall ships, I think it's a good signal. The other interesting development is the decision made by the Philippines to again resort to arbitration to settle its dispute with China. As you know, the former arbitration decision, which was taken in 2016, was very much in favor of the Philippines. And I think from a legal point of view, the Philippines will try to demonstrate that China has actually infringed UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, on many issues in the last few years and months, particularly with the Philippines. I think this way of travel is a way of which is not going to, I would say, totally alleviate tensions with China, but at the same time it will sort of limit the tension to a certain extent. Now, where tensions are less manageable, maybe, is probably in the Taiwan Strait. Now, I still believe that China would like to keep itself within what has been called the gray zone strategy and operations. So, in order to intimidate Taiwan, to to sort of put more pressure on the current government in Taiwan, in a context where the Taiwanese president, Lai Ching-te, who was elected in January this year, is in a weaker position. As you know, it doesn't control the legislative yuan, the parliament anymore, and which is controlled by the opposition party, the KMT, with the help of another blue camp party, the TPP. So it gives another opportunity to China to put more pressure on the Lai Ching-te. So, of course, these gray zone strategies and operations are not without the risks. What I'm worried is that an incident, takes place in the Taiwan Strait, which would lead to a kind of military crisis. But I don't see any, for the time being, China moving to a more aggressive strategy, which will, for instance, a blockade, which in my view would be an act of war, and I don't see China moving that direction in the foreseeable future. So now the other important development, of course, has been the recent development in Korea, and whether it's going to jeopardize the triangular security relationship between the US, Japan, and Korea, because that will have an impact also on the broader balance of power between China and the US and its allies in the region. But I'm sure that we have a Korean Mr. Hu from Korea will tell us more about what would happen after Yoon is impeached, and if he's impeached tomorrow. So now, moving to the Trump administration, because that's a big unknown, and whether Trump is going to destabilize the relationship or put more pressure on China. There's been in China itself, there's been some concern about the fact that Trump is going to disengage from Europe and from Ukraine in order to concentrate its attention and the US attention to the Indo-Pacific region, in particular to China. At the same time, I would say, and it's been mentioned earlier today on a few occasions, Trump's well, first of all, Trump is much more ready to his second presidency than for his first presidency. He has already appointed a number of people, and to some degree, some policy announcements have been made. Now, China has been kept in the dark on many issues, including tariff issues, but also on geostrategic issues. Now, I think overall Trump is going to adopt a more transactional policy, which to some degree may stabilize its China-US relationship with China. We have to bear in mind, actually, the first Trump administration managed to negotiate what was called a phase one agreement on trade with China. So that's something we have to bear in mind, because that's very much that's likely to be the way of travel as far as trade relations are concerned. Now, as far as Taiwan is concerned, I think Trump has been much less committal than the Biden, who, as you may remember, made on 4 occasions a commitment to Taiwan security if an unprovoked attack is started by China on Taiwan. Trump is going to put pressure on Taiwan in 2 ways, in my view. First of all, on buying more weapons, be more serious about Taiwan security and defense preparation. But at the same time, I think he will put more pressure on Lai Ching-te, and I'm here as maybe it's more adventurous prediction, not to rock the boat, but to stay within the envelope of the official name of Taiwan, which is the Republic of China, which is another Chinese entity or state. Finally, we have to bring maybe Europe here to some degree, and other partners of China, which I think it's interesting to see how China is trying to reach out those partners, the EU, but also Japan, and to some degree India, which I think the Indian participant will tell us more about the recent improvement of China-India relations after the BRICS summit in Kazan, where there has been some agreement on the border issue, which has allowed actually both sides to resume a much more meaningful relationship, which had been sort of put on hold and frozen for 3 or 4 years since the deadly incidents on the Himalaya in 2020. So for China, I think the interest is to sort of try to take advantage of the Trump administration to drive a wedge between the US and its allies, both in Europe and in Asia. Whether China is going to succeed, it depends very much on Trump. And Trump is also a very astute kind of politician. They may also counter-attack in proposing more subtle China policy than the one we may anticipate. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Of course, we could see Xi Jinping at the inauguration during the 20th.
Yes,
who knows?